Okay. I guess on behalf of the rare disease uh, community of interest of GA4GH, we would like to welcome you to this special event that we've organized, celebrating tomorrow, pretty much. Depending on where you are in the globe, for example, in the southern hemisphere, like myself, is today already, which is the annual of Rare Disease Day. So I guess we tried to start last year a bit of a I guess a series. We've a first webinar that we've organized to celebrate or to remark this moment, and we're trying to continue every year with a new edition, and we're very happy that we this year we've managed again to pull together a couple of stellar stuff. Presentations, as well as what we're hoping to be a very interesting discussion towards the end that will be moderated by our chair. So I guess just to start very briefly, can we please go to the next slide? Or thank you. So Nicole and myself are chairing or are co-chairing the Rare Disease Community of Interest since its inception, and can just go to the next one stuff. And the only thing we want to just to remind you, for those that are not very familiar with what we're doing, in principle, the aim of the Rare Disease Community of Interest is to discuss, to share, and so to understand better the practices and challenges in data sharing in general in the rare disease domain. And we had a couple of events, in particular last year, that were focused specifically on these topics. As a second item is the construction or the building of a rare disease portfolio based on product standard specifications, toolkits, and platforms that are being developed as part of GA4GH. So pretty much, if you can think about let's say an out of the box set of tools that you can use for various purposes, starting from understanding how consent can look like, and how can you go from consent to actual implementation of the rules of the consent into a data sharing platform, and from there to things like, for example, matching variants, so doing variant level matching, which is the focus of a task force or a working group within GA4GH, to general phenotype matching or searching across the genomic as well as phenotypic data. Now, lately, obviously, because we're riding the wave of LLMs, so large language models and generative AI, obviously, this is of particularly importance also for the rare disease domain. And we're obviously also interested in understanding what is the role and the use of LLMs in this particular context. Nicole, do you want to talk about very briefly about the events that we have prepared for the next couple of months?
Yeah. Next slide, please. Great. Yeah, so we have the GA4GH April Connect event coming up in April, which will be held in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but will also be available hybrid. And we're going to have two sessions from our rare disease community of interest. One will be held on Thursday, April 3rd. And yeah, like I said, it'll be hybrid. So if you're not attending the conference in person, you can register and attend online. And this is going to be on exploring AI-driven innovation. So what we're really focusing on is talking about benchmarking for LLMs in the context of rare disease diagnostics. And we'll do an overview of benchmarking methods for evaluating LLMs, and then go into breakout sessions for deeper dives and a lot of interactive work. So that should be a really great session. And then on Friday, April 4th, also in person or available virtually, we'll have a session on automating patient matching to clinical trials, where we're inviting speakers to discuss potentials for and obstacles for automated clinical trial matching with consideration for digital tools and N-of-1 clinical trials. So yeah, we hope that all of you will be able to join us either in person or virtually for these sessions. And with that, yeah, we'd like to introduce our speakers today, and we'll be moderated today by Heidi Rehm. So our focus today is on advancing rare disease knowledge through global collaboration. And we have two great speakers today, Daria Julkowska from Adara, and Charlene Son Rigby from Global Genes. And with that, I'll turn it over to Heidi. Thanks all for joining.
Great, thanks, Nicole. It's my delight to be able to moderate this session in a field that I've worked in for many years. It's really just a great day in terms of Rare Disease Day. So I'm going to first introduce our first speaker, Daria Julkowska, as Nicole mentioned. Daria is currently the scientific coordinator of Adara, which is a rare diseases partnership that brings together over 180 institutions from 36 countries. And she has a PhD in molecular biology and previously coordinated the European Joint Program on Rare Diseases. And she also developed and put into action a set of collaborations facilitating research, including partnerships with European research infrastructures, patients' organizations, and industry. So just a power leader in this space, but I don't want to take up much of her time. I'll let you read the rest of her bio, but I really want to turn this over to Daria to kick us off. Both Daria and Charlene are going to give some presentations, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time in a moderated discussion, and we'll take questions from the audience, so be thinking about those questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Daria.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for inviting me here today and giving me the opportunity to present the European Rare Disease Research Alliance. Actually, before going into the details of what Adara is actually about, I think it is important to understand first that this program actually stems from more than 20 years of joint effort at the national, European, and international level. And so in the rare disease research ecosystem since 2006, exists already multinational funding for rare disease research projects. As you know, this is very important because the knowledge and the expertise for rare disease it's scattered. But there are also dedicated infrastructures specific to rare diseases, like, for example, Orphanet, that some of you may know, or RD Connect, but also others, like, for example, in Europe, EATRIS, which is for translational medicine, or ECRIN for clinical trials, or BBMRI for biobanking that offers support to the rare disease community. The voice of patients is driven by national patient organizations, and at the EU level by EuroOrdis that regroups more than 1,000 patient organizations from more than 70 countries. The international strategy for rare diseases is driven by the International Rare Disease Research Consortium, and finally, since 2017 in Europe, we also have so-called the European Reference Networks that not only support healthcare but also research. And so the idea is that all these elements were created separately, and in 2019 already we have kind of gathered these actors under one single umbrella. At that time it was of the European Joint Program on Rare Diseases, and that was really a major milestone in building the foundations of the consolidated rare diseases research ecosystem. So EJPRD, because this is how we call it, the goal of EJP was really to create like a kind of a seamless rare disease support cycle from creation and support of networks and sharing of knowledge on rare diseases through strong support of rare disease research by significant investment, and also supporting services that allow better gathering and the use of data, but also dedicated training and education of researchers and patients, but also mentoring of the research projects to accelerate their outputs and lead to the faster concrete results for the rare disease patients. And so all these elements were already comprised in the European Joint Program on Rare Diseases. And if we look at the results, so it was really, the program was really completed with success. So it was a program in which more than 2,000 people participated from 35 countries and 130 institutions, and they all contributed to the achievement. So after those 5 years, the program invested more than 100 million euros in more than 80 multinational research projects. We also sponsored 66 events that allowed on the creation of the new networks around rare diseases for which there were no yet connection between patients, clinicians, and researchers, but also sharing of knowledge and initiation of new research projects. Most importantly, the EJPRD also created so-called the virtual platform of data tools and resources that connects rare disease data and allows also on its reuse for research. And finally, we have trained more than 10,000 persons through the education programs and trainings. So now when it comes to ERDERA, what ERDERA is about, so the success of EJPRD allowed us really to pursue the ambition and to further tackle the yet unmet needs of rare diseases community. And so that's why we have created ERDERA. And this partnership is really of exceptional scale and ambitions to durably improve rare diseases research by impacting lives of those living with rare diseases. And it has three main goals. The first is to accelerate the diagnosis, the second to accelerate the development of the new treatments, and finally to influence the policies by providing relevant evidence of impact of rare diseases on patients, families, and society. So this is just to show you, sorry, I jumped too quickly. This is just to show you what we call the partnership-specific impact pathway with the three overarching goals that, as you can see here, the first one is really to accelerate as much as possible the diagnosis of patients and come to as close as possible to the goal of having it on average after 6 months of coming to medical attention. The second one is the development of new therapies, especially for diseases with no therapeutic options. And the third one, as mentioned, is to really understand better the impact of rare disease on patients' families and society to improve the quality of life. So how ERDERA is structured, as it was mentioned already previously, ERDERA is a European program that is a 7-year program with an investment of over 380 million euros, and including 150 million euros from the European Commission or European Union. And our mission is really to create this collaborative ecosystem across Europe to drive research, improve diagnosis, treatment, and empower individuals with rare diseases. So more than 180 organizations, including research institutions, funders, hospitals, patient groups, and businesses, are united to make this mission possible. And so, if you look at here at the way ERDERA looks like, we kind of use the metaphor of the house, because it's built on the strong foundations, and each part represents key element of our work. So its foundations is really on national and international commitment, and is focusing on national, so what we call the national mirror groups, strengthening of underrepresented countries, and fostering of global collaboration to enhance the national capacities and driving the long-term engagement in rare diseases. The walls of the house are the basis of the high-quality, reproducible research, with, on one hand, competitive funding, and on the other hand, of what we call the in-house research that accelerates to accelerate the diagnosis and therapy development and clinical trial readiness of rare diseases. However, the success of, let's say, of those excellent research cannot be built or cannot be done, and it really depends on a solid infrastructure, and that is what we can see here in the center, because ERDERA provides also specific support through the data hubs, but also advanced therapy platforms, expert mentoring, and education programs, and education programs for all of the stakeholders. And of course, at the top, you have the roof with a specific coordination and strategy. Very quickly about the governance, because I think it is important to understand that the governance of ERDERA is really underpinned by the participation of all the countries. So we have the governing board on one hand, where you have a representation and one voice for every country that participates in ERDERA. But also we have a specific place and vote to represent patient voice, but also industry voice, the voice of the infrastructures, and the voice of the European reference networks. And on the other hand, we also have a board of funders, that is separated from the governing board, because we want to make sure that in the structure like ERDERA, where at the same time you have research performing organizations that participate, we want to make sure that the decisions on the topics for the competitive calls are independent and are taken only by the funders, and there is no conflict of interest with the participating organizations that may also apply to those competitive calls. Another important part of the ERDERA governance is it's part of the execution part, what we call the patient and public involvement and engagement group, and that supports the participation of patients in different activities of ERDERA. So just a little bit about that. So how actually the participation of patients is being structured in ERDERA. So the first one is that the engagement and the involvement of patients is organized in two different levels. The first one being the inclusion of their voice through the participation, as mentioned already previously, in the governing bodies, but also through the creation and the support of the PPIE group, and the possible involvement as experts in different activities and sharing of their opinion, for example, through the open consultation. On the other hand, the second level is the use of the direct benefits for patients from the activities that are deployed by ERDERA. So patient can use, and you're going to see that in a moment, for example, our networking support scheme, but they also participate and get funded in the multinational research projects. They can get benefits from the education and training programs that we develop, and also participate and coordinate also the national bureau groups, and have facilitated access to the expertise that is available in ERDERA. So this is just very quickly to show you about what PPIE is, because I think it's a very important group that helps us really to structure the participation of patients also in every activity in ERDERA, making sure that on one hand we have a good representation from the patients in EJP in ERDERA, and on the other hand also that there is like a kind of internal support for the patients and the interested patient experts that would like to participate in ERDERA. Very quickly, what are the different opportunities that we are offering? So the first one, the funding opportunities. And so here, first of all, we implement the so-called joint transnational calls and funding opportunities on multinational research projects in different topics. And so there is one call per year, usually that is open in December. These projects are, there is a two-stage evaluation process, and the projects must include between 3 to 4 countries participating in ERDERA. And of course, the participation of patients is strongly encouraged in those projects. This is, just to show you how this kind of joint transnational calls were structured in the previous year. So as you can see, these are really very transversal thematics that can be about the natural history studies, the therapy development, the diagnostics, and so on. So they encompass all rare diseases. We do not make any selections or focus on any specific groups of rare diseases. The networking support scheme that I mentioned does not finance really research, but supports networking events and creation of networks. And it provides the small fundings of 30,000 euros to organize events that are dedicated to sharing of knowledge, bringing different types of stakeholders, and so on. And it is open continuously. And again, it's multinational, multinational projects that are being expected. And very often patient organizations are also part of those projects. I think it's also important just to mention that we are going to open in the next year the call for multinational clinical trials, and this is something which is currently under development. So we are working on this with different working groups to set up the specific call. And then when it comes to the supporting services, as I mentioned, we have a dedicated expert mentoring for the rare disease research projects. So this is again open to all, very much also to the projects that are applying to our calls. And the idea is really to accompany applicants and research projects with a set of mentors that researchers that may not have at, let's say, at hand in their daily life, especially when it comes to the methodological, statistical, or business development or regulatory aspects. So we provided this kind of mentoring support, and this is something which is offered for free. We also have a complementary module, which is the Innovation Management Toolbox, where you can that you can use at any time point. And again, it's completely free of charge, and it encompasses different types of resources that can help you, especially if you are interested in the translational research. We also have similar support, online support for the clinical trials methodologies. We have set up a set of courses and webinars, starting from basic to advanced one when it comes to the clinical trial methodologies for clinical studies in small populations, as well as together with our partner ECRIN, we also develop a dedicated toolbox for the multinational clinical trials that we know are also very, let's say, challenging, especially if they are driven by academic researchers. We also, as I mentioned, developed the virtual platform of data tools and resources. And this platform today brings more than 22 different resources, big catalogs, and that allow on connection of, let's say, different types of data, from genomic data, but also biobanks and other types of resources. That can be then not only searched but also used for analysis and reused for research. So you can connect. You have the link also to the virtual platform. I'm trying to accelerate because I know that I don't have a lot of time. Very quickly about education and training opportunities. What I just wanted to show you is that we have developed a massive online open courses. Again, these are completely free of charge resources, and you have the different themes: the diagnostic, the translational research, the innovative therapies, or the health and data and ethics and regulatory frameworks. So they are available on the Future Learn platform, and again available for free for anybody who wants to learn about those topics. We also developed, as part of Erdera, we will be developing a dedicated trainings, which we call the blended trainings, because they are more organized around, let's say, the level of the trainee, which allows us to bring together both patient and researchers communities also in the same trainings. And we also will have some specific trainings that will be dedicated to the pediatric patients. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention, that I mentioned also at the very beginning, which is the second part of the Erdera. One was funding, and the second one, this was so-called Clinical Research Network, is that this is what we call the in-house research. There is an investment of about 50 million euros to accelerate the diagnostic research, to accelerate the clinical trial readiness, through the better reuse of the data from different types of resources, and especially from the electronic health records, but also the therapy development. And this encompasses not only the advanced therapeutic medicinal product, but also N of few approaches. And so the idea is really to develop different types of proof of concept that are then scalable and can be reused for the benefit of the whole rare disease research community. And so with that, I would like to thank you and give back the floor to the organizers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daria. That was terrific. I think we're going to hold questions until we've been able to hear from Charlene. So, and then we'll hopefully have time for some discussion. So with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Charlene Son Rigby. She's the CEO of Global Genes, which is a nonprofit organization focused on addressing the needs of the rare disease community. And Charlene started her career in neuroscience at Roche, but has spent much of it building organizations at the intersection of data, technology, and life sciences. She was previously the chief business officer at Fabric Genomics and held executive roles at Oracle and Double Twist. And equally important, she's also the parent of a child with a rare genetic disease and co-founded the XDX BP1 Foundation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlene to hear about her work.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Heidi. And thank you for having me on this, very important day for the rare disease community. So I want to start, as Heidi mentioned, I want to start here because a lot of my, motivation and urgency and desire for advancement for the rare disease community really started with my experience with my daughter Juno. So I had spent a 25-year career focused on developing and commercializing solutions for getting insights out of big data. And I was at a company, Fabric Genomics, that was making AI technology for genomic data in the clinic. And my daughter Juno was born right around the same time. And she started missing milestones when she was 4 months old. And it took us 3 years, finally through whole exome sequencing, to get a diagnosis for her. And this really it was an abrupt turn for me, going from a technologist to suddenly becoming, the mother of a rare disease patient. And, we ended up starting a foundation with 5 other families, very, very focused on accelerating therapies. And as we started to develop those assets and really try to de-risk STXBP1 related disorder as a target, I kept realizing that there were so many things that really could and should be done across rare diseases. So I ended up leaving industry and going fully into the nonprofit space to work across diseases, across, the more than 10,000 rare diseases, so we can raise all boats. And so I wanted to start out with that because I am now going to segue to talk about the mission of Global Genes. And one of the concepts that we have really been driving forward is this term next-gen patient advocacy. And what we recognized a couple of years ago was that the patient advocacy space has fundamentally changed from what it was 15 years ago. And this is very largely due to the innovation that we've seen in the technology space in terms of, new medicines, genetic medicines, precision medicine. It's also because of forces like social media, where patients are able to now connect with each other around the globe and build these communities where there might only be 1 or 2 patients in a country or a region, but across the globe they're able to come together and really increase their numbers. So it's a very, very exciting time in the patient advocacy space. And what we're seeing is that advocates really are starting increasingly to lead and drive forward, therapy development because they have the most urgency. And this next slide that I have is not going to be any surprise to anybody who's on this call. There are now over 10,000 rare diseases, and that number is growing. And the reason that I included it here is really just to highlight that we often are, because there are so many new diseases that are being identified, every year, we often have very little information on, on that tail of the 10,000 rare diseases. And whether those diseases are newly identified or have been around for a long time, there's significant impact on patients, both medical as well as economic. And so this is really urgent and a crisis from a public health standpoint. So I want to talk a little bit about Global Genes' program. So our focus is really enabling and empowering patients and patient advocates. And we do this across 3 pillars: support, education, and research. And so in the support realm, we have a number of programs, including our Rare Concierge program, where we, on a one-on-one basis, help patients get access to resources. And this can be across simply connecting them with a patient group or a patient group that is in a related disorder, or it can be helping them to get access to resources that will help them from a financial standpoint, experts in a particular area. So it can be, really across a multitude of needs that advocates have and patients have. We also have education programs that include in-person events, like our Rare Drug Development Symposium. We've also introduced the Rare Advocacy Exchange, which is a webinar-based program that's going to go throughout the year and is focused on leadership in the patient advocacy space, as well as toolkits and reports that are available on our website. And finally, what I'm going to spend most of my time on today is talking about what we're doing on the research side, including with RareX. So let me move to the next slide. Oh, I just wanted to also highlight that we have a program that enables, really provides enablement and capacity building for patient advocacy groups. We have over 800 groups spanning many disease areas in over 40 countries. This is a little bit of information on our concierge, which I already covered. Okay, so what is RareX? RareX is a research program of global genes, and it was started in 2021 really to help patient advocates be able to accelerate rare disease research and break down the silos that often exist with data collection. And I think that there's two issues around the challenges with data. One is that a lot of data historically was collected in a way that really wasn't able to be easily shared out of the institution or program that collected it. But the other issue is what I brought up earlier around all of these new diseases where there's very, very little data to characterize those diseases and to move insights forward so that we can develop therapies. And so our goal with RareX was really to create a patient-reported data set that was owned and stewarded by patients. So our data collection model allows collection of data across diseases using a foundational data set that we call the head-to-toe survey. And then it becomes more specific in terms of deeper data collection. And that's driven by symptoms versus disease. The reason being that with a lot of these rare diseases, they're not fully characterized. So we can't assume that patients do or don't have a specific set of symptoms. And so this symptoms-based type of data collection enables us to really understand a disease holistically and also understand it at the patient level. And so that's what this branching logic is that we provide. And we have invested a lot in terms of really making sure that our data is robust from an ontology standpoint, so it can be easily aggregated and analyzed with other data sets. We generate our data collection. Sorry, the advancing is going a little slow for me. So we generate how we collect our data through expert working groups. And so this is an example from pediatric neurodevelopmental disorders, where we started with a landscape of 252 measures and then ended up narrowing down that number to 13 that were implemented on the platform across 10 different symptom domains that had been identified as important for neurodevelopmental disorders. And we had a cross-functional working group that developed this set of measures that included clinicians, researchers, as well as patient advocates. We've invested a lot in data governance because we know that this data collection needs to support global data collection and be compliant from a privacy standpoint, as well as robust from a data security standpoint. I just want to show some examples of the type of insights that can be generated from this type of data collection. So we held our first Accelerate Rare Open Science Data Challenge, and one of the tasks was for participants to identify underrecognized or new phenotypes within specific rare diseases. We had included 27 ultra-rare neurological diseases in this challenge. And here you can see examples from those 27 disorders. There were underrecognized or new symptoms identified actually in each of the 27 disorders. And this is not a surprise to me because these patient-reported symptoms that patients are experiencing every day might not be reported in an individual clinician visit. And so you can see for AHC on the left and 4-H leukodystrophy on the right, different systems that the patients are experiencing and had reported in RareX. So today, where we are with the data collection, we are collecting data from 83 disorders, and that's in partnership with 124 patient advocacy groups, and we have over 8,000 participants enrolled across 98 countries. I just wanted to highlight, especially since Tudor talked about the interest in large language models in rare disease for the GA4GH rare disease group, that we just announced a technology grant from Chan Zuckerberg to apply LLMs to this rare disease data set. And we're very excited, about this, including because it will more readily enable people who aren't bioinformaticians to be able to access and make use of this data. So I'm just going to go through a couple of quick use cases and be mindful of time. So this is just another example of how, because we have this foundational data set of symptoms across multiple diseases, how we can start to analyze that overlap of symptoms and also start to look at different mechanisms or pathways. So this is an example of analyzing ion channel disorders together in a cluster. And then this example is a basket-style natural history study that is being conducted at Colorado Children's Hospital, where 5 diseases are, the patients are being seen in clinic as part of a research study for those diseases, and we're collecting standardized data across those disorders, which includes clinician as well as patient-reported data. And then I also wanted to bring up this example. This is for our SLEEP consortium, which was launched last year, and it's for disorders of narcolepsy. And we have been building on the patient-reported outcome space and expanding into digital health technology, as well as curated sleep data. So RareX can really become a platform for deeper, more disease-specific analysis. That's it, and I will turn things back over to Heidi.
Terrific. Well, it was great to hear from both of you. Such amazing projects and programs that you're both involved in. I can see there's at least one question. I'm going to let a few build up while I get to start with a couple of questions of my own. Obviously, both of you are working with lots of patients and also clinical systems. I wonder if you could comment a little bit on the pipeline from clinical lab to research. So many patients get tested in a clinical lab and there's data generated, a report generated. And I know, Charlene, you spoke about collecting genetic test reports, and Daria, I know you're bringing all these patients into research or through funded programs. But can you comment a little bit more on, is there a plan or already like direct pipeline? So if the patient says, fine to share my data, you could bring it directly from a clinical lab as opposed to the patient needing to shepherd and request that data one at a time. And either first, maybe Charlene, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we don't have formal collaborations yet with clinical labs. We would welcome the opportunity to do that. So, today what patients have to do, they have to, as you said, get their genetic report and then upload it into RareX. We think it's very important to have that genotype data right next to the phenotype information that's being collected, but it is a 2-hop process. And a lot of patients, I think the challenge is that especially if they didn't receive their genetic report, yesterday or last week, finding it so they can upload it can definitely be a challenge. I think that, with some of the electronic health record extraction that is happening, that's becoming easier, but we would love to solve that problem in a much more automated way for patients.
Absolutely. And Daria, do you have any comments?
So I just want to make sure that you can hear me well, because when I'm listening to Charlene, sometimes she's breaking a little bit, so I do not know if it's my connection or in general. So I would say that in Europe, things are, well, either more complicated, but maybe also differently organized, because, well, as you know, we have 27 European member states, but I mentioned also the European reference networks. And the European reference networks are networks of the expert centers in the different countries that are organized in 24 different European networks that bring all rare diseases by, let's say, groups and typology.
Yeah.
And that means that they are really the source of healthcare and connected to research, meaning that they are the ones that are seeing actually patients, and they are the ones, every European reference network has its own, or is building its own registry, which means that the data are, let's say, directly collected from patients, can be consented, for example, for the reuse of research, and also extracted from the electronic health records. So I would say in the ideal world, obviously that would work very seamlessly. We are not yet there. We are progressing, and actually ERDERA, part of the ERDERA Clinical Research Network is concentrated on this to demonstrate how, thanks to the European reference networks, we can seamlessly extract those data and reuse them also for research. But the other also important element is that we also do it in a federated model, meaning that we do not necessarily put the data in some centralized place, but rather see how we can implement it at the, let's say, at the national scale, where directly patients, for example, are being the genotypes or the genotypes and other types of data is being collected as part of the, let's say, of the healthcare system, but also as part of the research, especially for the undiagnosed patients.
Makes sense. Thank you. Another question, both of you work with many rare disease organizations, spanning lots of diseases. And each of these, whether you're funding them or you're, collecting that data on behalf of these organizations, there's always a balance of the autonomy of those organizations that, of course, want to really focus on their own rare disease, have complete control over that data and that work, versus the collective rare disease community, where we all need to share all of this data in ways that can really build the infrastructure, build the approaches, et cetera. And I wonder if you could comment on the balancing, enabling the autonomy of each rare disease group and organization versus really trying to create a collective system so that the whole ecosystem is advanced, as you said, Charlene, and Daria both talked about the need to sort of focus on the whole ecosystem. So maybe Daria, do you want to start first?
I will start quickly. So I think that it's sometimes part of well, in ERDERA, we have different, let's say, types of cases. So we have actually patient organizations like World Duchenne Organization, for example, that are also driving some, specific parts actually of even some data projects and so on. And they are very much advanced also on, how they work with data. I would say that it's very much also about understanding or speaking the same language and understanding each other, because especially if we understand how functions those federated models, then it's much easier, because that means that actually they can be in the ownership of data. They can decide when the data, let's say, when the data is being shared and how, and at the same time, their data can be visible, or at least we can have the information about what they have. And eventually then, based on their agreements, they can give the access to this data. So I think it's a good balance. It's a lot of, let's say, a lot of dialogue, and I would say involving patients from the very start is extremely important, because that means that we can work together, and this kind of trust is being built from the start.
Right, absolutely. Charlene?
Yeah, I think that the thing that I think a lot about is resources, and that individual advocacy groups have, and understanding what their mission and their key gaps are that, they need to address in the short term. And, hopefully through that can guide, some of the choices that they make around resource allocation, especially since it's really hard to ask patients and patient communities to participate in multiple studies. And so that has to really be thought through pretty, pretty well. I do think that, funding and time is always a big consideration. That's one of the reasons why we, started RareX, was to deburden the patients. But, I also am know that some patient communities want to be the PI of the study. They want to, manage that process. And so I think that it goes to some extent back to what Daria, you were talking about around, we need to, help to have the, patient communities understand, things around what's going to make it easier to aggregate data. Are there considerations that need to be made around how we consent the data? Because we don't want to get into a situation with new data sets where we are not able to actually aggregate them in a way that's going to help the, that specific patient community, as well as, the broader community.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. It's a challenge, it's a trade-off. I'm going to actually turn to a couple of the questions that have been submitted. So one is around the use of Global Alliance standards. So question is, will RareX, and I'll also put this on Daria in terms of Dara, be generating public phenopackets, so using the phenopacket standard in terms of patient clinical phenotype? And are the diseases inventoried, information shared using the Mondo ontology? Maybe Charlene, do you want to start?
Yeah. So great questions. And I actually know that our PI is on the phone, but and so she'll be happy to hear these questions. So we have invested a lot in ontologying our data with HPO. And, we're now in this next phase of enhancing our analytics platform, partially enabled with this Chan Zuckerberg grant, an additional focus. And so we're highly interested in phenopackets, and, we know we need to expand our our disease inventory and also our ontologies. So I don't want to say a timeline when these things are going to happen, but we definitely want to include them on our roadmap.
Great. Well, you have a huge audience in Global Alliance that's happy to help with that. So
Well, we love that.
Daria, any comment about that?
Well, I mentioned the European Joint Program on Rare Diseases, and we were one of the driver projects for GE4GH. And so we have a strong collaboration with GE4GH and all the standards. So our goal is not to develop new standards, but to adopt and to help in the expanding further. So all our efforts are completely aligned and using phenopackets and also using all the, let's say, all the standards that are being developed jointly. So this is mostly done through our colleagues who are working on the data hub in Erdera, on the virtual platform previously, and also very much on the genomic and the diagnostic part as part of the program, which is the RD Connect platform and so on. So everything is being aligned.
Great, excellent. So the next question is towards Charlene. Curious how the LLMs will be deployed. Will you be comparing literature to registry data? Is the goal to identify conflicting, corroborating genotype, phenotype data? How will the validation be performed? Very exciting.
So we're in the early planning phases, but we will be comparing literature to data that's been reported in the data collection. So we're very excited about that. I think that so validation plan is being put together by our team now. So I think one of the things that I also want to kind of take a step back on is that the purpose is really to enable, or one of the main purposes, if I didn't mention it before, was really to enable people who are not bioinformaticians to be able to interrogate the data and be able to do it in a robust way. And so there will definitely be literature tie-ins, and we also want to be able to do it in a, be able to create an interface that will be very interactive and easy for somebody who is a non-expert in the data.
Yeah. And here's just a follow-on question from that, which is also relevant to Daria. So any research organization that's collecting data, including diagnoses that might have come with a clinical lab report, let's say, and doing analyses like using large language models and other things, you're going to make diagnoses in that data as researchers are looking at it and analyzing it. And I'm wondering if there's a mechanism to confirm and return that information to the patients who donate their data, like in a centralized way, or it's only dependent on, what researcher gave that data and whether they have a mechanism for it.
You want me to go first, or?
Sure, Charlene, why don't you
Okay.
start?
Yeah, so when researchers get access to the data, it's going to be de-identified in the typical process. And so we have to start thinking about, are there ways to, with following consent and privacy, to be able to still funnel that back. It's an interesting challenge, but you're right that that's going to happen.
Daria, does Daria have mechanisms to relay results back to patients if they're discovered in the course of the studies?
So I think it depends on, on the let's say the European regulation and ethics regulations of the individual countries, because for many countries, it's really part of the healthcare in a way system. So it's not from research. So it always passes by clinician in the healthcare part, and so that means that there are there is a very clear framework of how this happens.
Yeah.
And so usually any kind of incidental findings are not necessarily reported, except if there is, of course, an agreement by patient. But then again, it may differ from one country to another.
Yeah, and I wasn't talking about incidental. I was really talking about the primary diagnosis of these patients.
But that's part of the let's say the healthcare and I would say that we still need to maybe we still need to have some more time to educate, or to dedicate the time to educate the clinicians and also geneticists, to make sure that this, let's say, the transmission of the information of the diagnosis is done in the best conditions possible.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, the next question is a question for Charlene. To what extent, although I think this is relevant to both of you, to what extent can a patient be flexible about choosing which party they want to share their data sets or withdrawing their consent? How do you manage each of the participants' consent status? So maybe start with Charlene, but Daria, you could comment if there's anything relevant.
Yeah, so we have a dynamic consent in terms of data sharing. And so that's, we've physically or object-wise separated it from the consent into the research study. And so participants can choose to who they share their data with. So they could actually choose to share it with no one, although as everyone knows, rare disease patients are highly motivated to have their data be used for, to drive progress. And so that really doesn't happen, but they can choose to, not have their data used for commercial projects or only have it used for healthcare projects. So we have a few basic selections. We don't make patients choose every single research, kind of say yes to every single research request, because that would be a lot of burden. The other thing that patients can do, or participants can do, is that they can go in at any time and update their consent status. And so then they could, withdraw their consent completely, or they could just say that I only, for instance, previously maybe I only wanted my data shared for non-commercial, and now I want it shared for commercial, or vice versa.
Right, that makes sense. And Daria, is there any?
I think same here. Maybe just one thing I would like to add is that, of course, patients can withdraw their consent, but if their data are already being used for some of the studies, they cannot be withdrawn from those studies, because then that would make some, holes in the studies. And in any case, we are talking here most of the time about the pseudonymized data or anonymized data.
Yeah, great. I'm going to interject one of my own questions and then go on to Julie McMurray's. One of the challenges we've had in our own rare disease study is that our IRB limits us to enrolling patients who are from our own country because we don't have jurisdiction to consent a patient in a country outside of our own because our IRB only operates in the US. I'm wondering if each of you, like we can all appreciate that you really can't do rare disease research, especially the long tail of most of the very rare diseases without patients in many countries. So I wonder if you could speak to thinking about being able to run studies where you're actually able to enroll patients in many different countries and how to orchestrate that sort of consent process in IRB situation or different. IRB is the US term, but there's REB and other things in other countries.
So if I may, I would say that in theory, in Europe, it's even worse because you don't have only the IRB for the country. You have you have this kind of ethical agreements per institution. So, but I would say that the good thing is that there is progress in Europe, and especially when it comes to the clinical studies. So now every clinical study needs to be submitted to some kind of, let's say, European portal, which is organized by the European Medicines Agency. And there is like a kind of harmonization in the first opinion so at the European level, then normally should influence also the opinions at the national level and accelerate the agreements at the national level.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Charlene?
And for Rare X, obviously we're a single study, so maybe it's an example more than kind of an overall framework, but we have had to invest a lot of resources and time in terms of figuring out how we would be able to support a study that's collecting data in a compliant way across many countries. So GDPR was the first, but now even in the US, as you know, there's multiple states and they've all implemented their own privacy regulations, and they're similar, but they're not the same. In the Middle East is different, and it's really a very it's a patchwork landscape in terms of the overall requirements. And so we have a data privacy officer. We continue to invest because things are changing over time. But I think that the other piece that I was thinking a lot also about was we need to make sure that our study is compliant and the data that we're collecting is compliant. But then also we have to really navigate that carefully when we're collaborating with other groups and we're aggregating data to make sure that it continues to be compliant in that process. So it's a really active and ongoing process.
Yes, absolutely. Understood. Okay, we have one last question, which is good because we're almost done. Could you please speak to your approach to phenotype collection and support/plans for longitudinal follow-up? I think both of you did talk a little bit about phenotype collection, but the longitudinal follow-up is a critical piece, and maybe you could each just expand on the phenotype collection part. Starting with maybe Daria first.
Yeah, so in our case, I mean, it's part of the overall, again, it's part of the registries from the European Reference Networks and the natural history studies. And so normally this data should be data should be collected on the long term. There are some specific investment that support those registries, but there is always a challenge, let's say, of making sure that they are maintained and also supported at the long term and national level.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and just from a Rare X standpoint, so we have this standardized set of data collection and then deeper data collection for disorder types and then into disorders. It is challenging to get longitudinal data on an ongoing basis. I think that one of the things that we have as a strength is the partnerships with the advocacy groups, where, you know, they have ongoing engagement across many things with their communities. And so we really partner with them to, you know, emphasize the importance of, you know, specific types of, you know, symptoms and data that's collected in the, in RareX, to try to encourage, you know, people. I think that from a, you know, kind of interest standpoint, different people have different reasons and different things that motivate them, whether that be data or, you know, like kind of, you know, friendly competition and things like that. So it is something that we focus a lot on, longitudinal data.
Yeah, great. Well, with that, I'm gonna thank both of you for your outstanding, both your presentations today, but really the work that you're doing in this field. It makes a difference for patients and for what we can do for rare diseases. And I also want to thank Tudor, who was the person who came up with the plan to do this webinar and invite the two of you. So I want to thank Tudor and maybe give him the last word to shut this down.
All I can say, I guess, you know, from both myself as well as Nicole, is that we're grateful to having had this opportunity to spend this hour together as part of the Rare Disease Day. And just thank you again. Thank you, Heidi, for moderating this, and thank you to our amazing speakers for both the presentations as well as to our participants for the attendance. Nicole, any last words?
Yes, just thanks so much for attending, and thanks so much to the speakers. This was a great session. I'm glad that we had you all here.
All
So
right.
stay tuned for some email. So emails that will follow from I guess from this meeting. And I'm assuming that the email will also include a link to the recording.
And happy
you,
Rare
everyone.
Disease Day today or tomorrow. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.